Beneath the blinding Egyptian sun, a team of archaeologists unearthed a doorway no map had ever marked. The sand around it was different, denser, almost reluctant to give way, as if guarding something the desert itself wanted forgotten. When the first torch was lit and its flame breathed against the stone, the air inside seemed to recoil. What they saw beyond that entrance was not a monument to eternity, but an act of erasure. Hieroglyphs lined the corridor, but their stories had been murdered. Every royal name had been hacked from the walls. Every cartouche, the sacred oval that bore a king's divinity, was scorched black. Melted wax clung to the stone like tears frozen mid-fall. The torches flickered against carvings that once celebrated life and afterlife, now reduced to jagged scars. Someone had defiled this tomb with purpose, someone powerful. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became. The scent of decay lingered beneath the dust, a sweetness that didn't belong in this dry world. The silence wasn't peaceful. It pulsed, alive with something unsaid. Each step echoed against the hollow corridors, a rhythm that felt like heartbeat, slow, uneasy, human. One of the archaeologists whispered, "This shouldn't be here." He was right. Royal tombs were built to honor names for eternity. This one had been buried to destroy one. Egypt, the empire that worshipped perfection, that built monuments to memory itself, had tried to erase a piece of its own divine lineage. Why would a pharaoh, a man-god, desecrate his own blood? What secret was so monstrous that it had to be burned from stone? The walls gave clues, but in fragments. A faint outline of a woman's figure beside a throne, the ghost of a crown over hair once painted gold. In one corner, traces of a hieroglyph remained, the sign of a daughter, but her name, her story, had been chiseled out so violently that even the stone beneath it seemed to bleed. Outside, Egypt gleamed with pyramids that touched the sky, monuments that defied death. But here, in this pit of shadows, the illusion cracked. The land of gods was also a land of guilt, a place where even immortality could be revoked. When the final chamber was opened, a thin veil of air escaped, like the tomb exhaled after centuries of silence. Inside lay a sarcophagus unlike any other, royal in design, yet stripped of every symbol that named it. No titles, no lineage, no prayers for the afterlife, just emptiness. The lead archaeologist stood frozen, his torch trembling in his hand. Egypt's history had no record of such a burial. No pharaoh's daughter was ever said to vanish, and yet, here she was. He turned to the others and whispered, almost afraid to hear his own voice echo. In a civilization built to preserve memory, this was the story they chose to bury alive. Long before the tomb was sealed, Egypt stood as the heartbeat of eternity, a kingdom carved in gold and sun. Its people believed the universe itself was a fragile balance, a cosmic scale held steady by Ma'at, the law of harmony, truth, and divine order. Every breath of wind, every rise of the Nile, every stone set upon another existed to honor that perfect balance. To disrupt it was to invite chaos, the one enemy Egypt could never tolerate. At the center of this perfection stood the pharaoh, the father who became a god. He was the living embodiment of divine order, the bridge between mortals and the eternal. His blood was not his own. It was said to flow with the power of the gods themselves. When he spoke, laws became destiny. When he walked, the ground was blessed. And yet, behind the glittering crowns and sacred hymns, he was still flesh, a man tasked with pretending to be immortal. The royal family existed as both sanctuary and prison. Princesses were not daughters in the human sense, but instruments of political symmetry, living offerings to uphold Ma'at. Their marriages sealed alliances, their births affirmed purity, their silence maintained balance. To belong to divine blood was to live in a cage of gold. Within the palace walls, everything gleamed. Alabaster floors, incense perfuming the air, servants moving in rehearsed devotion, but perfection demanded fear to sustain it. Every choice was shadowed by the dread of impurity, betrayal, or the slightest hint of blasphemy. The pharaoh's council whispered constantly of omens, curses, and celestial warnings. A single deviation in ritual could be seen as a crack in the divine order, a threat to both heaven and earth. And so, the father who became a god ruled not only his kingdom, but his family, their hearts, their destinies, their bodies. No one questioned him, for questioning a god was to question creation itself. Yet the weight of his divinity grew heavier with each passing year, pressing against the boundaries of what even gods were allowed to desire. behind the perfection, something restless stirred, a silence within the palace that was too careful, too rehearsed. Servants avoided one corridor, priests lowered their eyes when the pharaoh passed. Order had begun to rot from within, and so the question that history tried to silence still lingers in the sand. But what happens when a god desires something forbidden, even within his own bloodline? They said the night she was born, the moon bled into the Nile. The priests called it an omen, not of doom, but of rebirth. From that crimson glow emerged a child whose eyes reflected both dawn and dusk, a light too pure for the mortal world. They named her Neferura, the daughter of light. In her, the court saw beauty. In her father's eyes, something closer to destiny. Raised within the sanctum of the royal temple, her world was measured in rituals and stars. She learned to read the heavens before she could read words, tracing the constellations that guided kings and farmers alike. By day, she painted with gold dust and lapis, capturing the gods as if they whispered directly to her. By night, she studied the sacred texts, her voice echoing softly through stone halls, where even priests dared not linger after dusk. The court adored her. Servants claimed the light shifted when she entered a room. The sick touched her robes for blessing, but her father's advisors watched with unease. They whispered that she asked too many questions, questions only men, or gods, were meant to ponder. Her wisdom bloomed too fast, too bright, as if touched by something divine. Then came the carvings, the moment the whispers began. Temples along the Nile unveiled new reliefs showing her standing beside the pharaoh himself. Not behind him, not beneath him, beside. The image of equality, of shared divinity. Such a thing was unheard of. Only queens were honored in that way, and she was no queen. Still, the pharaoh ordered it so. "She carries my light," he said. "Let the world see." His voice was gentle but absolute, and though the priests bowed, their eyes betrayed fear. They knew the old legends, of gods who mistook reflection for reincarnation, of fathers who sought eternity in forbidden mirrors. In the private chambers of the palace, incense burned longer each night. The pharaoh began visiting the temple more often, always at the hour she studied the stars. His words grew softer when he spoke her name, and the court began to fall silent in his presence. Rumors spread like cracks in marble. Some said he believed the goddess Hathor had returned through her, the deity of beauty, love, and motherhood. Others whispered he saw in her the soul of a lost queen, reborn to complete what fate had once denied him. Yet through it all, she remained innocent, radiant, curious, unaware of the shadow growing behind her father's devotion. The Nile reflected her smile, but beneath its surface, the current had already begun to turn. To him, she was divine. To the priests, she was dangerous. To history, she would become invisible. Beneath the palace, beyond the halls known to any mortal, there existed a chamber carved into the earth like a secret confession. It was not marked on temple records, nor blessed by the priests of Amun. Only two men possessed its knowledge, the pharaoh and his high priest, who swore by blood never to speak of it. Here, the air was always colder, heavier, as though the gods themselves refused to enter. Torches burned with a low, suffocating glow, their smoke swirling thick as fog. The scent of resin and myrrh clung to the stone, masking something older, the faint metallic tang of sacrifice. The chamber walls shimmered faintly with gold leaf, etched with forbidden prayers, invoking Isis, mother of life and rebirth. Yet something was wrong. The inscriptions bent the natural order, calling not for divine union, but for possession. The pharaoh had changed. Gone was the ruler of balance and wisdom. In his eyes now burned the fever of belief. He spoke less of duty, more of destiny. Each day he grew convinced that his daughter, his radiant Neferura, was no longer mortal. "The goddess has chosen her," he told the high priest. "The vessel of Isis must be joined with Ra's flesh, so the heavens may be whole again." The priest hesitated, but fear chained his tongue. To oppose a god was to invite annihilation, and so the night was chosen. When she was summoned to the chamber, the corridors above were silent. Even the servants had been dismissed under threat of death. The only sounds were her bare footsteps against the stone and the tremor of her breath as the door sealed behind her. The air was suffocating, thick with incense. From the altar, golden idols stared with expressionless eyes. Shadows danced like specters on the walls. Her father stood before the altar, draped in crimson linen embroidered with solar symbols. His crown rested beside him. Tonight, he did not need it to be divine. "Do not fear," he whispered. "You are chosen." His voice broke somewhere between tenderness and madness. The high priest began the chants, low, rhythmic tones that echoed like a heartbeat beneath the earth. Her hands trembled. Every instinct told her to run, yet where could one flee from a god? The rite began, a ceremony meant for heavens, not for flesh. The chamber swayed in smoke and whispers, the boundary between worship and horror dissolving into one. She stood frozen beneath his gaze, her breath catching as incense burned her throat. To him, it was devotion. To her, it was imprisonment. And then, silence. A silence so deep it felt alive. By dawn, the chamber was sealed once more. Servants found the pharaoh in the upper halls, his face calm, his robe stained with what the priests claimed was sacred oil. He lifted his arms to the morning light and declared, "A new goddess has ascended. The heavens are whole again." But the palace did not rejoice, for the daughter was gone. And in every shadowed corridor the servants whispered, she was never seen again. The morning after her disappearance, the palace fell under a silence thicker than mourning. Servants avoided the corridors where her laughter once echoed, and guards refused to meet one another's eyes. The pharaoh gave no explanation, only decrees. The word daughter was never to be spoken again. Panic spread like fire through the court. The priests of Thebes argued in whispers, some claiming the girl had ascended to join ISIS, others insisting she had angered the gods. Yet beneath their polished hymns was terror. They all knew something sacred had been broken. The high priest who had stood witness to the ritual vanished within days. His home was sealed, his name erased from temple rolls. Then came the orders. Every carving, every relief that bore her image was to be defaced. Sculptors worked in the dark, hammering through the night as stone faces cracked beneath their blows. Her name was chiseled out of cartouches with ruthless precision, leaving scars that ran like open wounds across the walls. In temples along the Nile, priests burned offerings once dedicated in her honor, their smoke rising like apologies to absent gods. It was not the first time Egypt had rewritten its own history. The practice had a name, damnatio memoriae, the damnation of memory. When a soul was condemned, even remembrance became forbidden. The belief was simple, cruel, and absolute. To erase a name was to erase a spirit's chance at eternal life. The official record spoke of a divine cleansing. The pharaoh, they said, had uncovered a plot, a rebellion within the royal house. To protect Ma'at, he had purged corruption. Others claimed a plague struck the inner palace, and the gods demanded purification. Whatever version was told, it ended the same way. Her existence was rewritten into myth, her absence transformed into order. But the truth could not be entirely buried. Fragments of her likeness survived in broken statues, half buried under temple floors. A single relief found years later showed her face deliberately scratched away, yet the outline of a smile still lingered beneath the scars, as if the stone refused to forget. Her burial was denied its rightful rites. No procession, no priests chanting her passage into the afterlife. Instead, under moonlight, a small group of trembling servants carried her body beyond the palace walls. They lowered her into an unmarked chamber, wrapping her in linen stripped of royal insignia. No prayers were spoken, only silence, broken by the distant hum of desert wind. The pharaoh forbade offerings in her name. No tomb was built, no record inscribed. Even her mother's name was struck from the palace registers. Egypt, the land that promised eternity to all its children, condemned one of its own to oblivion. In the kingdom of eternity, she was condemned to nothingness. In the months that followed her erasure, Egypt itself seemed to shudder. The wind over the Nile turned colder, the river's waters sank below the reeds, and crops along the delta withered before harvest. Priests declared that the gods had grown silent, that something sacred had been broken beneath the throne. But the servants whispered a different story. They said the silence was her voice, that at night, when the palace slept, faint sobs drifted through the walls, and the torches flickered without wind. The pharaoh dismissed these rumors at first, calling them weakness born of fear, yet his eyes began to hollow. He no longer walked in sunlight. He held counsel only by the dim glow of oil lamps. Offerings to the gods multiplied, gold poured into temples, incense burned until the skies grew black. Still no peace came. The high priests recited hymns meant to cleanse sin, but the air inside the palace remained thick, unmoving, as though the building itself refused to breathe. Then came the dreams. Chroniclers wrote that the pharaoh began waking in terror, claiming to see a figure at the edge of his chamber, a girl wrapped in burial linen, her face veiled but her eyes open. She spoke no words, only wept. Each morning he emerged more aged than the night before. The God King who once commanded nations now muttered to shadows, his crown resting crooked on his head. The people began to whisper that the curse of the Daughter of Light had fallen upon Egypt. Markets emptied. Workers refused to build new temples. Mothers taught their children never to speak her name, for fear her spirit would listen. Yet the more her memory was denied, the more restless the land became. Sandstorms rose without warning, swallowing caravans whole. The Nile receded until the riverbed cracked like bone. In desperation, the pharaoh ordered a final decree. Every record of his reign was to be burned. His statues were dismantled, his name struck from obelisks and tomb walls. He believed that if history forgot him, the curse would lose its target. What began as a god's obsession had ended as a man's unraveling. He sealed himself within his palace, surrounded by silence. The same silence he had forced upon his daughter. But silence is not absence. It is memory without mercy. In the stillness he heard her footsteps. In the shadows, her breath. And so Egypt's god-king faded, his reign collapsing into rumor and dust. His temples fell to ruin, his dynasty dissolved into forgotten names. What remained was a warning carved only in whispers. In trying to erase his daughter, he erased his own immortality. Thousands of years later, the desert finally surrendered its secret. The excavation site, buried beneath layers of shifting sand, lay silent except for the steady hum of generators and the scrape of brushes against stone. Floodlights cut through the darkness, revealing what had once been sealed by fear itself. The forgotten tomb no record had dared to name. Inside, the air was still, ancient, heavy with dust and memory. The archaeologists moved carefully, each step echoing like a trespass. What they uncovered first were fragments, small, almost insignificant to the untrained eye. A piece of jewelry, twisted and half buried, its gold eaten away by time. But on its edge, beneath centuries of soot, one symbol remained. The faint outline of a sun embraced by a crescent moon. It was not a royal crest used by any known queen. It belonged to someone erased. Nearby lay strips of decayed linen, fragile as breath, faint traces of royal insignia still visible in the weave. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Layla Karim, ran her gloved fingers over them and whispered, "This isn't a queen's tomb." Her voice trembled, not with excitement, but something colder. This was hidden. They pressed deeper. Along the far wall, a soot-covered panel revealed a fragment of inscription. After hours of cleaning, the symbols emerged, hesitant, incomplete, yet powerful. She who was beloved, and then forbidden. The team fell silent. In that single line, centuries of denial crumbled. This was no myth. This was the pharaoh's lost daughter, the Daughter of Light. The discovery sent ripples through the camp. Some celebrated, calling it the greatest find in decades. Others refused to enter the chamber again. One worker swore he heard a woman's sigh echo from the dark as they lifted the lid of a smaller, unmarked coffin. It was far too small for a queen, too modest for royalty. And yet its carvings were intricate, reverent, almost mournful. Inside lay a body reduced to fragments of bone and cloth, the faint shimmer of gold dust still clinging to the wrappings. Her hands were crossed over her chest, a gesture of peace or resignation. The scientists took photographs, measurements, samples, but no one spoke louder than a whisper. Dr. Karim stood at the coffin's edge, her voice barely audible. "Did he bury her here out of shame?" she asked. "Or was this protection?" The question hung in the stale air. Even now, the truth refused to separate itself from myth. The camera crew recorded every angle, every motion. Dust drifted in the torchlight like falling ash. The desert outside howled as if remembering. And when the final lens turned toward the open coffin, the last grains of sand slipped from the bones of the girl once called divine, the daughter loved, silenced, and buried by the god who made her vanish. Across centuries, the echoes of one hidden tomb stretch farther than any monument of stone. History is rarely kind to those who disrupt power, who threaten perfection, or who exist too vividly for the rulers who demand control. The pharaoh's daughter, once called the Daughter of Light, became the blueprint of a pattern repeated endlessly. When love intersects with authority, cruelty often follows. What is too human to be controlled is buried, silenced, rewritten. Even today, her story resonates. Daughters vanish behind closed doors, silenced by fathers, families, or systems claiming protection but practicing ownership. Whispers of injustice echo through villages, cities, and nations, where tradition, pride, or fear masks oppression. Names are removed from registers, lives erased from memory, truths buried in the guise of order. The pharaoh's actions were ancient, but the impulses that drove them are universal. The desire to dominate, to sculpt perfection, to eradicate what challenges authority. Modern society may drape itself in enlightenment and law, yet the silence remains. Invisible chains bind hearts the same way as they did in the corridors of Thebes. The same need to control love, to rewrite history, to erase the inconvenient child, persists. The empire of silence wears new faces, new titles, new justifications, but the effect is the same: absence, denial, and a haunting emptiness. It is here that the contrast sharpens. Egypt was a civilization of gods, temples, and eternal memory, yet it chose to conceal its own failing. Modernity boasts truth, justice, and record, yet too often fails to protect those most vulnerable. The pattern of erasure, of silencing the innocent to preserve the image of the powerful, continues across time. A reminder that progress cannot undo the lessons of fear. And in all this, the pharaoh's desire for perfection remains the lens through which we see his tragedy. He sought immortality, divinity, and order, but in trying to shape what was beyond control, he destroyed the one being he claimed to love. The empire that should have celebrated her light instead cast it into darkness. What he feared most, imperfection, shame, exposure, became the force that condemned her. When archaeologists reopened her tomb millennia later, they did more than uncover a sarcophagus. They unearthed a truth that had survived fire, silence, and stone. Her story refused erasure. It speaks to us now, in hushed tones and lingering shadows, reminding the world that memory cannot be fully denied. She died once, but the silence that killed her never did. And as the sands of Egypt settle again over her hidden chamber, the desert swallows her tomb with the same care and quiet it has offered for centuries, leaving behind unease, empathy, and the cold, unyielding question: how many more remain lost to the empire of silence?